group. And I guess sign up link would be shared in the chat. Lastly, we want to thank our Zoom sponsors, Vecna Robotics, and we are grateful for their constant support so we can do something like this. And yeah, so again, thank you all, our great panelists to join us tonight. And this event is called Finding a Job in Robotics from Recruiters' Perspective, because we have all our recruiters on here to be on our panel. Well, as a robotics engineer myself, I know searching for a job, interviewing for a job can be really daunting. But so is finding the right candidate in the field of robotics, which I think is a completely different experience than, say, like finding an IT professional, because there are a lot of firms, there are a lot of recruitment firms who just represent engineers, and there's a lot of bigger pool, which makes it difficult. Otherwise, there's nobody representing robotics engineers, I guess. So this is what we're gonna do tonight. We'll find answers to such questions and try to look at the other side of the coin and learn from our experience of our panelists, and mainly how we can better prepare our profile and improve the recruitment experience in general for both the company as well as the applicant. So yeah, we have gathered our experts and these amazing women in robotics, and it's my honor to introduce them. So first we have Ms. Laurie McCloskey, who is a recruiting manager at Six River Systems, which is a warehouse automation company based in Waltham. She's also the lead for the diversity, inclusion, and belonging program. And we actually first met Laurie at a Women Who Code meetup, and we were really grateful to find somebody who supports our cause. And thank you so much for being here. I'm glad we could work out an event together with you. And yeah, we also have Ms. Emily Barden, who is a people operations generalist at Optimus Ride. It's a Boston-based autonomous vehicle company. She has held a passion for candidate experience, emphasizing on recruiting excellence and execution in a highly competitive market, which is, well, robotics is. Thank you for joining us tonight, Emily. We are really excited to have you. And last but not the least, we have Ms. Jennifer Sharp, iRobot Senior Talent Acquisition Advisor, driving their talent acquisition strategy for global R&D teams. She's working on this for over 15 years, and she has a very strong background in early career, high potential, and leadership talent development. And she's a strengths finder and also co-active coaching enthusiast. That's a lot of stuff I'm hoping to learn from you tonight. And
wonderful.
Honored to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, everybody. If you like to share something, if you like to introduce yourself or say anything about us or whatever is there's on your mind for tonight, please go ahead. Starting with Laurie.
Well, I first want to thank you for setting this up. I know it's been a while since we met in person, and
yeah,
it's exciting to connect with all the women who are here today. So I'm happy to answer questions. I know that the search process can be daunting. I also support folks one-on-one occasionally as a career coach, and I want to make sure that this is a helpful session for everyone. So please ask your questions. And if there's something that we can help with offline, this cause is near and dear to my heart. So you can certainly find me on LinkedIn as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. Emily?
Yes, likewise. First, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored, especially to be next to Laurie and Jennifer, although via Zoom, which is great. The method to my madness is we're all a candidate at one point in our life, and I think it's good to have checks and balances on both sides. So I really want to be here as much of a resource as possible. Even when we're working with candidates, sometimes, hey, it's not the right time, which is fine. So I think it's always important to have connections, through your career as you continue to develop, because you never know when your paths can cross again. So very honored and excited to be at such an event that I think is an incredible opportunity to have more women in robotics and more allies of women in robotics as well.
That's really aptly put. Thank you so much. Jennifer?
Absolutely. I just want to thank you for putting this together and inviting me. And also for this platform. I'm actually here in the West Coast in San Diego, but I do support iRobot's Bedford location. So if it was in person, I may not be able to attend. So thank you very much. And again, this is very near and dear to my heart as well. And I just want to give kudos to everybody who's joining tonight. You're taking the right steps in the right direction, developing your network and your personal brand. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And we are glad to be doing this as well. One note to the audience, we encourage you to ask questions through the Q&A section of the webinar on topics which are currently being discussed. After we have covered everything, we will also have a live Q&A session with you. So if you have any questions regarding any topic, you will be able to ask, and we'll try to answer them all. In the meantime, a note to panelists as well. If you get a chance, maybe quickly respond to those questions. Feel free to do so. Otherwise, we'll tend to them later. And apart from this panel, we also had conducted a survey of frequently asked questions out in the open, and we got a lot of responses, and whose responses we're gonna email all the participants tonight to get a more broader knowledge of what's going on. So yeah, that being said, let's get started. And our first topic is on resume and the ADS, the applicant tracking system. So the very first question, and feel free to hop on, whoever wants to start first. What are some of the key elements of a great resume? Whoever wants to go first.
Absolutely. So I'll start off. So, some of the key elements, it's, the key thing is, how do you stand out from the rest of the applicants? How do you brand yourself as a high potential candidate on paper? So, some of those key basics that we're really looking for, that you want to highlight, especially for early career, recent college grads, and again, early career is, we're looking for those schools, for those partnerships, those universities, list your degree, your graduation date, your GPA. Those are all things that are very important that we're looking for. But also, in addition to that, list the tools and technologies you have experience with, especially those that align with the requirements of the rec. Those key things pop out. We receive such a high volume of resumes. If we're specifically looking for a developer that's used Python or C++, we want that to pop out on the resume. Also, the other thing too is internships are so valuable. So be sure that you list your internships. That's real world experience, and it's fantastic. So we want to see those internships. Also list any leadership opportunities. So any involvement, for example, this event, any fraternity, sorority, any honor societies that you're involved with, any awards, that's all wonderful information to leverage and display your leadership skills as well. So those are some key things that we're looking for. Another thing I like to recommend people do is research the company's website and align and become familiar with the verbiage. So one of the things that iRobot is, we're mission-driven builders. If I saw that on somebody's resume, I would be so excited that they've done their research. So become familiar with that dialogue and that verbiage and integrate that into your resume as well. So those are just some key tips. Yep.
I really like the last one. Like, that is something to have very specific to a company. That
Yep.
I totally agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, I think Jennifer did an excellent job of explaining the contents. I think that's so important. I think another thing to think of is, when you are designing your resume, I always like to call it my 3 C's: clear, concise, and consistent throughout top to bottom. Because at the end of the day, if it reads well and it's attractive looking, that's very important too, because at the end of the day, most of us do have a significantly high volume of resumes, and we want to be able to go right to a certain point to see the information that we're specifically looking for. Another thing to that too is always being mindful of being in the recruiter's shoes and vice versa, because at the end of the day, as much as I wish I could say I'm an engineer, I'm not, right? And some recruiters aren't as familiar or are a little bit newer to technical resumes in the landscape. So when you think about listing your technologies, especially that are important, obviously you're in robotics, so things like Rust and C++ and Python are so crucial. What I do enjoy when engineers do is list their technologies in cohesion with a certain project or a certain internship or a certain job it did. Because sometimes if, maybe it isn't an experienced technical recruiter seeing, oh, I saw they did JavaScript, that must be an incredible Java engineer. And that's not always the case. Maybe it was a side project that you had worked on or a personal project of yourself. So listing it in corresponding to a certain project, I think is also really helpful. And then lastly is please always upload your resume in a PDF format, because other things can get butched and botched, and we want to make sure that it's as attractive as you thought it was when you submitted it.
Yeah.
So I would add that your degree is often less important than the impact that you've had with the technologies that you use. And when I say that, I mean that we are working with a really complex code base. And oftentimes when we look at projects and information about your past experience, we want to understand the types of technologies that you were working with, but more importantly, what the impact was for the customer. So if you were working on a user interface, or if you were, as an example, on a collaborative mobile robot, as we do at Six River, we'd want to understand what the impact was, the level of complexity, and your role in the project. So whether it's your resume or an interview, a model that I always think about is like STAR. So it's what was the situation? What action did you take? So like, what was your role in that project? And like, how did you contribute? The situation, the task, the action, and the result. And I always emphasize the action and the result, because ultimately, if you had a significant impact, that story is key. And the sooner that you can tell that story in the recruiting process, the better. So if you're able to highlight the impact of your work on your resume and the complexity that you were addressing with the technologies that you use, that's going to help us understand how you approach challenging projects. And your resume is not the only piece. So yes, we look at resumes, but please build out your LinkedIn profile.
Yes.
And whenever possible, attach links to your portfolio. You may have examples of your work that you can showcase, and we absolutely will take a look at those in addition to what you provide in the resume itself.
That's a good point. I mean, I never thought about like updating my LinkedIn profile. I mean, I do, but I never thought like even recruiters check that. So that's
I've seen
good,
some
yeah.
folks even link it in their resume, which makes it so much easier to connect with the appropriate profile. And then if you have a portfolio, we do look at it.
Yeah,
we're not
that's
just
great.
relying on a system to screen through resumes. And we also have engineers who like to look at work samples as quickly as possible in the process, and that can actually help us engage folks who have a really strong experience.
That's good to know. And even being clear and concise, that's a very great point to keep in mind. This is so moving on to the next question. This is kind of personal for me as well. So being an engineer, there are a lot of course projects, there are a lot of internships, and sometimes it's very difficult to gauge the impact or gauge how important it's going to be. So people just end up adding everything and which makes your resume 2 pages long. I do. So it hasn't hurt me yet, but I want to know, like, is it good? Is it bad? Is it a deal breaker? So does a 2-page resume hurt in any way?
I don't have a significantly long answer to this. The way I think about 2-page resumes, as long as the information is valid and it's not repeating itself and it's all truthful and things that you're excited about, I think it's worth to showcase that. Exactly to your point is if you do work on a lot of projects and not all of them interest you significantly. If you have a project that you worked on, you're like, I could never do this in my professional career because I didn't get me out of bed every day, then I wouldn't necessarily list that because you don't want to start off your career that way. So my answer is, in short, if it's valuable information, for the company and all things that you're very excited about and proud of, I think it's great to have it, but not necessarily something you need to have a bunch of filler information just to have a longer resume.
That's fair. Thank you for answering that. Does anyone else have anything to add on that?
I do, and I want to address the question from the audience as well. So one person asked how to best format your resume to get around an automated system. At Six River, we actually review every resume, so it's not like they're filtered by a system before a human reviews. And yes, like we do work with robots, but we're not robots. So it's less about the format, it's more about the content. To Emily's point earlier, be concise in the sense that it's the start of a conversation. It doesn't need to be absolutely comprehensive and representative of everything that you will bring to a conversation if you're invited to an interview, for example. But it's a great way to highlight what's most relevant to that specific role. So I think it's important to tailor your resume. If you have a significant amount of experience and it requires 2 pages to represent the projects that are relevant to that role, absolutely include it. But if you're including content that is not relevant to the position, it'll probably get lost in the mix. And I would just mention that the resume is really a start of the conversation, so it doesn't need to be everything from your career.
Absolutely. And I agree with Lori and Emily as well. There is no golden rule that it needs to be 1 page. It's the content that's important. So I just recommend everybody, customize and custom tailor your resume to that company and that specific role, and it will more than likely catch the recruiter's eye. But one thing at iRobot as well, just like Lori had referenced, we do look at every resume. It's not being filtered out by a robot. So we humans are looking at the resumes. Absolutely.
That's good to know. So I'm safe. Perfect. So yeah, moving on. So there are a lot of times a applicant or candidate applies to the same position multiple times. So what would you recommend if that happens, and what are the steps you take? Emily?
Yes, so something we do at Optimus Ride. So I'll start with if it's multiple positions, so different recs, not the same, robotics engineer. Maybe it's one's on motion planning, one's on robotics and controls. Something we do at Optimus Ride is we're very good about evaluating candidates broadly. So say if there's a chance you did apply to our motion planning position under planning and controls, but after further review, we see, hey, we think you'd be better on the controls team or the behavioral planning team, something of that sort. We have that conversation. So what I do in our phone screens, or even if one of our director of engineering or engineering managers sees the resume before I do, we usually do ping each other, whether it's internally in our ATS saying, we think this person would be better there. And we evaluate candidates broadly. And I think that's something important to discuss up front with the recruiter. I think so much of the process just comes down to good communication. So if that's the case where you do have an interest or you don't have an area of technical preference just yet in the application stage, I think it's important to discuss it. What I will say is if you find yourself, this is your dream company, you want to work here so badly, and you see the same exact position open, there's a lot of different reasons why positions are open, right? Sometimes you need a hire yesterday, and sometimes you're forecasting for the next quarter or even the quarter after that, depending on how the company dynamic is. A lot of the times, I know we have it too, we have a careers at optimusride.com. So we do have a lot of candidates that end up emailing that directly. If by chance you have that or a simple LinkedIn connection, depending on how the person is, even if you reach out and be like, hey, I know I applied to this multiple times, is there something missing for me? I think it starts a conversation. And personally, I think it's great. You have that bravery behind you to ask and know, because maybe there is something that's not a fit that maybe you're not seeing, because I think as much as we tailor job descriptions, it doesn't always tell the whole story. So think of that as well. And I think if you do take that extra step, for me, I'd love a personalized LinkedIn connection, because that way we have a platform to stay connected as you grow as well.
That's a good answer. So I mean, I always apply, even if just 2 or 3 stuff matches from my resume and not all, because I understand it can be like different requirements than what they have mentioned, and sometimes it's not, even that will work. So that's just a good tip. Yeah. Anyone else has anything to add to that? Are we good?
I agree with Emily. We have a very collaborative environment, and we do share across all of the recruiters at iRobot as well. So very similar approach as Emily and her team.
Okay.
And we also tag candidates for future consideration, given that the company continues to grow. So connecting with folks on LinkedIn is a good tip just to keep in touch, and then we will reach out if a candidate's a better fit for a different position.
All right. So moving forward to another important piece. Oh,
before we move on, just a very quick question from the audience. Do we need to disclose the need for sponsorship now in future in resume itself?
Not required. So typically during a screening call, we will ask about work authorization in the location. So we do hire across North America. Sometimes that question is for Canada or even Europe. But in North America, if we think about the US market, many folks have current work authorization. And oftentimes we'll ask about work authorization and any timelines that we need to consider. At Six River, we're able to sponsor, so it's more of just a point of information such that if we move forward in the hiring process, we're able to provide the necessary documentation and support for either a transfer or an extension of a STEM OPT period.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And we have that as a question as part of the application process that they can choose to answer if they'd like, if they do or do not require sponsorship. But it's great when they do answer it because it helps with the conversation during the phone screen. We also have a wonderful immigration attorney as part of our TA team as well, who is a fantastic resource, and she's open to answering questions to candidates in process as well.
Yep, I think at least in the field of robotics, like requiring sponsorship is not a big deal. That's what I've like compared to other fields. So I think that's correct. It's good to go. Okay, so like Laurie mentioned that resume is not just everything, so it's a important piece. So we have another thing which is equally important, the cover letters. I think they are outdated, but I definitely want to know if how cover letters are used to gauge your candidate and what do you look for in it, and if that is kind of a tiebreaker in some situations. Please share your experience on that.
We do not require cover letters. We oftentimes just have that option if someone has, let's say you have a gap in your resume or some additional information you'd want to share with us, we're happy to review it, but not required.
And I agree with Lori, it's not required. Personally, I do not prefer them because it's an extra step due to the volume. However, if it's a non-technical functional role where writing, marketing is a key component, talent and competency that we're looking for, it can be helpful with those types of roles. But typically, I would say no.
I agree there. It's not a requirement at Optimus Ride either. I think it is useful, down the line in your career, if you are looking at a career shift or adjustment or a different type of move within your career, or perhaps you want to step into a managerial role and you want to showcase that you have a lot of mentoring ability and capabilities and have proven success. I actually like to take the flip coin of cover letters. What I see, and we offer it at Optimus Ride as well, and it's completely optional. We do have a little blurb that's like, tell me a little bit more about yourself. And I think opportunities like that really offer a way to not only humanize yourself, but really stand out in the process as well. It's also a great opportunity. I know I see it a lot as well, especially because as our graduate students and our PhD students are pushing graduation, have them explain a step further about areas of their technical preference too, to go to the earlier point of, yes, we evaluate candidates broadly. So I think in the process, if you have an opportunity and you feel you can use that little blurb, which are more informal sentences than a cover letter, to stand out, that's something I highly recommend.
That's a good point. I think job seekers would now get an idea on how much time to spend on them, because like we do end up spending a lot of time something if it's not that much of a requirement. So thank you
I
so much.
totally agree with the Harini over here. Like, I used to spend so much time on cover letters before, but I think the small paragraph would work, so that's better.
Okay, so so moving on to our next topic is hiring cycles. So how do you determine that we need to employ more people, and is there like a dedicated month of the year that you do so? And can you like basically tell us more about that time?
I'll jump in. So at Six River Systems, we're continuously spinning up new squads, and a squad is led by a principal engineer, and then there are multiple software engineers. So we're continuously hiring. It's not that there's a specific time in the year. We do review on a quarterly basis just how we're trending. If we need to spin up additional squads, usually it's just adding positions. And identifying where we might need additional skill sets to round out a team. But we're always hiring for our robotics teams. So it's an ongoing experience.
That's very
David, I Robot. Oops.
Oh, please go, Jennifer.
David, I Robot as well. So we have an annual spring, summer, fall revolving intern program. So we're constantly, hiring for interns and new grads. So it's a fantastic program. And again, it's an annual need.
Great. And likewise to that, always continuously reviewing. I think the more obvious ones, right, are when there's an exit on the team, whether that person exits the company or internally transfers to a new team. As a startup company, a lot of our hiring and needs do fluctuate depending on our funding. If the startup scene is something that you're very passionate and inclined to join, I certainly recommend sites like Built in Boston and VentureFizz to stay in tune, because I still get the newsletters from when I was a candidate, just to stay in tune with the community of, hey, they got X amount of funding. Their job board is going to be pretty hot pretty soon. We do evaluate quarterly, but for us, Q4 is when we usually have our managers and directors do their forecasting for their projects and their OKRs throughout the year as well. And then determining, okay, how many people do I need to be successful in this project? And then that's when we have a collaboration between the managers and talent acquisition about what skill sets do we need and how many of them.
That actually gives me a good idea how to gauge the market. So if somebody like recently gets some funding, I saw some news that they're gonna be hiring soon. So that's a good tip.
And even for us too, since we are an autonomous vehicle company, when we launch new deployment sites, that presents another need for additional staff too.
That's actually a very good idea.
All right. So
before we go ahead, Jennifer mentioned something about internships. So we have a question on that thing, like, do you have anything to add about resume and everything, or just for interns?
Yeah.
Or does everything apply the same?
Can you repeat that one more time? I'm sorry, it was cutting out.
Oh, sorry. So do you have anything to add more on the internship point of view of resume applications, or
They're just so valuable. Absolutely. I recommend people get engaged, get involved in those internships. If you can, from all your 4 years in undergrad, if possible. It's so important, when due to the volume of candidates we have coming in. For example, I have a current robotics software engineer role. I think we have about 400 candidates in that rec. And going through resumes, those that have the internship stand out, and I'm excited to send over to the hiring manager versus those that don't have any type of reference to that. So it's just such a competitive landscape. The more that you can be actively involved, building your network through that professional experience, I think is just, it's so important.
So while we hire interns, do you see anything special in them? Because since they wouldn't have a lot of experience.
Absolutely. You know, we are looking for not only the high potential, so really the aptitude, potential, and aspiration, but also, you know, that iRobot culture match as well. So, you know, again, it's how do you craft your resume to reflect that you have the potential to be a high potential candidate on paper? And again, that resume is really the vehicle to start those conversations, to really highlight yourself during the first call with the recruiter or the interview. It's really a vehicle for next steps and planting that seed.
Thank you.
All right. So we need to move on to the very important section of our event is interview process and some tips for preparation. So let's go forward with that. My first question on that is how many rounds of interviews are there in general? Because like different companies have different. There's no standard for that. So what do you prefer, and especially why? Emily?
Sure. The way I like to think of our interview process is 3 main types of conversations with some supplementals involved. So I'll walk you through what it typically looks like, especially for folks who are coming out of master's or bachelor's or even PhD programs as well. So usually after a conversation with me, depending on the engineer, the type of discipline, in this case for being robotics, we do a HackerRank coding evaluation. The way ours are set up, most cases for these types of candidates will be Python or C++. And it's done on your own time, and it is time maxed at 90 minutes, so it never goes over that. And usually we use that for a very good basis of conversation for about a 45 or 60-minute technical screen with either the engineering manager or a senior engineer within that specific technical discipline. And it's not that we look for a perfect HackerRank score or perfect lines of every code that we can. It just offers a good basis of conversation to understand your thought process and your ability, and then see how much support you need. And then from there, as long as all parties remain interested, we have now our virtual on-site interviews through Google Meets are about a half a day. And something that we do at Optimus Ride is we actually do an introductory presentation at the beginning of the interviews. And I know that can be a little daunting to hear at first, but it's not a formal presentation where we're judging and evaluating your presentation skills. What it really does offer is an opportunity for you to tell your story, your expertise, your background, and your persona in your own words versus an email from me or the manager or tech lead you spoke to. What we see is that in those 10 to 15 minutes of presenting, it offers a much stronger connection to the rest of the group. So when you go for your one-on-one interviews throughout the day, you're not asked the same icebreaker questions to get to know each other, which is really great for us. And I think for that, it's another opportunity to really showcase who you are to an interview.
I absolutely loved your idea of having the presentation. Like it is so like personalized way of having the interview and not just a general thing. So great idea.
Our interview process at iRobot is very similar to what Emily just explained as well. So it's typically the first call with the recruiter, and that recruiter should set expectations for the steps in the process. So after that call with the recruiter, it typically goes to a Zoom interview, 30-minute Zoom interview with the manager. And that's more, again, of an informational overview of the team and the role, maybe go into a little bit technical depth and complexity, but not much at that point. If that goes well, it's typically either a HackerRank and then onto a round of Zoom interviews with the team. And those are both technical and functional. We typically use a behavioral-based interview style. You know, we're looking how past behavior is a predictive indicator of future behavior. So that interview with the team will typically be more of a technical deeper dive, but also functional as well. And you know, Lori had mentioned this earlier, we're working with the STAR methodology. So situation, task, action, result. So how you want to prepare for that interview is, work through some scenarios where you can give some clear, concise examples. Of projects that you worked on, mistakes that you made maybe, and what you would have done next time. Interviewers typically like to hear that as well. But that behavioral-based interview style is typical of what we use. And it's a great, again, proven method that will help to give a clear, concise, positive candidate, but also hiring manager experience as well, which is really important. And that style we use consistent with all of our candidates, and it helps to mitigate the risk of adverse impact and unconscious bias. And we're really ensuring diversity with diverse interview panels as well.
In Six River Systems, the final interview is very similar, and leading up to that, we also have the technical assessment. And we, just to give you a window into what happens after the interview, we debrief as a team. So each interviewer has a specific focus area so that you're not covering the same ground with different rivs. And then the day after interview takes place, that interview panel will meet and then share feedback and notes from the examples that you provided. So whether it's examples from a situation you encountered or a situation you might encounter at Six River. And we also invite the individual who completed the technical assessment with a candidate. So that way we have a holistic view of the technical skills, but also core values alignment. One thing we look for is just like humility in developing your solutions. So like one of our internal mottos is like, it's not my code, it's our code. So we do look for that alignment with the core values throughout the interview process as well.
Thank you so much for answering that. It does gives me a clear idea of how the entire process looks like. One follow-up I had on that is usually technical interviews are taken by engineers who have less people judging skills than you. So how do you prepare them to get a clear idea or get all those points from the answers of the candidate? And a lot of times even they are nervous. It just shows. That's what at least from my experience. So how are they being prepared, or what are some of the rubrics that the company shares with them to look for?
So we have a set of questions that our rivs refer to in prepping for an interview, and they're actually linked to the type of position. So for a full stack position, it might be different from the simulation team. And we have internal interviewer training so that folks have a sense of best practice. If we were to take a 45-minute interview slot, how to incorporate the questions about a candidate's experience. I'll be running another round of that training because we're continuously enhancing our interview practices, especially with the lens of diversity, inclusion, and belonging as well, to make sure that when we do prepare for those debriefs, we come ready to share evidence from the candidate experience. And when I say that, what we're really looking to collect is examples of your experience or how you would handle a situation. So the more that you can describe your experience and share evidence of your capabilities, the more that an interviewer will be able to advocate for you in that debrief. And that's something we always look for. We have a rating system that we use internally. And one of those ratings is the person who's the strong advocate. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that the more that you can share the specifics about your experience, an interviewer will be able to take those notes and then share it with the interview panel during that debrief and hopefully advocate on behalf of the engineer.
That's a great point. So basically being proactive, answering proactively and being clear in the reasoning behind what you did. So I think that's,
Exactly.
to summarize,
The reasoning matters often more than just the outcome. Just like, how did you get there? Because every context is different. And the more that you describe not only the result you achieved, but like your philosophy and like how you handled that really difficult situation, that gives a practical example that an interviewer can take back to the debrief.
Great. Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. I was just going to say, and we have a pre-interview meeting as well with the interview team. So we have questions that align with our internal builders code, and we assign those to each of the interviewees. And then this also helps to ensure that we're asking each of the candidates the same exact questions as well. And we have a similar scoring system to what Lori had referenced as well, that really helps us to assess candidates if we do have multiple candidates interviewing for a role, which is very important. But again, I agree with Emily, you know, that clear, concise ability to be able to tell your story. It's a wonderful thing to practice. And I, encourage everybody, practice with friends, families, mentors, by yourself in the mirror, get to know your story and tell it well. That's one of the things being a recruiter as well. I can go back years ago and remember a candidate because of that story that they told me. So it's really those internal intrinsic triggers, just very important.
One piece of advice too, we call them our interview slates, when we have a candidate we know we want to have for a virtual onsite, I get an interview slate of who they'll meet with throughout the day. If for any reason you are maybe unsure of what each person will kind of hone in on in their interview, as we do discuss, like the rest of the folks here, simply ask the recruiter and be like, hey, do you mind sharing what this is focused on? It never hurts to ask. And especially for engineers who maybe haven't been interviewing for 20 years straight and may not know, it's always worth it to ask before. So please, I'm a huge advocate of that.
Thank you so much. This was really interesting to know. And so how are we doing so far interviewing you? I hope that's all good.
Great. And keep in mind, the recruiter is your ally. We're here as your partner through the process. So reach out, ask questions. Again, we are your champion. So, utilize that and build that partnership and ask the questions throughout the process.
I would also recommend before the technical assessment step, ask for details so you know exactly the amount of time, even like before it occurs, just to prepare yourself. As Jennifer and Emily mentioned, oftentimes our recruiting team is like your first point of contact. So like make sure that you understand the full interview process for that organization, what that technical screen might look like. And then when you receive an invitation, hopefully, you'll be able to prepare yourself, maybe check out any relevant platforms in advance, make sure you're comfortable working in that environment if it's a live assessment, or if you need to brush up on technical skills that you might have used less frequently. Just understanding what would be required in the interview process will allow you to prepare in advance.
That's a great point, actually. I mean, I never thought I should be asking these questions to the interviewers, like, what are you going to ask me in the next one? Is it going to be a live coding round, or is it going to be just about my projects? So this is I think it's mostly we have this myth that we are not supposed to ask details about the next interview. So thank you for breaking that.
At the end of the day, it's a two-way street. You have to interview the company yourself. I mean, if you feel that you're either getting a cold shoulder or not a helpful response, and just knowing, hey, is this focusing on my motion planning theory, something of that sort, or am I diving into the engineering side of machine learning versus science, like all of those different things. If you feel that you're not getting, a simple or a communicative response, I mean, that's a sign to you as well.
I hope members of the audience, you're taking notes, because these are very important points. And if by chance you miss anything, this is going to be recorded and we're going to upload it to YouTube. So feel free to go and listen back to that. Cool. So moving forward, I guess this is quite, so what's the best time and when's the best time to follow up after an interview? Jennifer?
I say immediately or within 24 hours, because we have that feedback meeting either later that day or the following day. And, it's great to have the interviewer say, oh, I received a wonderful thank you email, and customize it for that interview. Don't send just a blanket one out to the whole group, but I say absolutely immediately after. And if you don't have the correct email signature, ask your recruiter or coordinator that helped to schedule the interview. But I think it's critical to do it at least within 24 hours if you can. Absolutely.
I
Well,
definitely recommend. Oh, I'm so sorry. Did he
Oh,
need
no,
to
no,
go?
go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I definitely recommend also, depending on how we do it, for us, even though we are virtual, we still kind of have our walkout of the office session at the end of the day, just to make sure you're all allocated and, we answer any questions. Always, go over logistics and timeline with the recruiter. I am shocked yet the word ghosted has not come up this session yet in any of the questions. I'm sure it could, which is okay. But I think when you do ask for a timeline, then the recruiter and the company are accountable for what they tell you. So I think it all comes down to communication and knowing when, okay, this is when I should hear, this is when I check in, because if you get to that point and for whatever reason, there hasn't been a line of communication, that expectation was set. So always make sure that's covered as well.
Don't worry about the ghosted part, it's coming up. So
I spoke too soon.
Yeah. Actually, thank you for breaking that. I personally always used to wait like 3 days before sending an email because I thought, we need to give some more time. But yeah, I send it immediately now. Thank you for that.
just before we move on to the next question, we are almost out of time, but if you guys are okay with it, we can extend a few more minutes, like 15 minutes more. Is that okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you. So yeah, I think we are almost at our last section. So networking. So most candidates do feel ghosted during the process, and so how can we best bridge that gap and remain positive and patient for the candidates? So yeah, what should we do?
A personalized thank you note is always helpful. When I say personalized, you don't necessarily need to track down the email address for each interviewer who you met with. Remember, your recruiter is your advocate, and you can share reflections from the interview. So that might be a quick few lines about what you learned. If you have any follow-up questions about the company or the position, including those, just making sure that it's tailored to the team. And then we're happy to share that internally. We'll often include something like that in a Slack channel update as an example so that folks have access to that. So keep it simple, and then ask for the timeline just to reconfirm. And also let us know if you have other timelines we need to consider. We know that sometimes folks are interviewing with multiple companies, and we do our best to align timelines as quickly as possible such that you're able to fully consider Six River if you're considering multiple companies. So that's really important to share with us in advance so that you have a chance to progress through the interview process quickly.
I think what I would add is making sure you have the right means of communication. I caught myself in this mix-up once, whether I'm sourcing a candidate on LinkedIn or they refer to me on LinkedIn, I once a candidate is in our pipeline, if you will, I always like to move communication to email because that's just my source of truth for communication, in linking with our ATS. And I caught myself last week and I had missed something because a candidate had pinged me on LinkedIn, although the email is normally my means of communication. So if you're unsure or you want to make sure that you're on top of your recruiter as well, just ask what the best form of communication is too, because if they are a phone call type person, especially in tight deadlines, then you have that open way of getting to them.
That's a great point. Yeah. Thank you so much. And yeah, is there anything else to add to this? Okay. So moving on to referrals. How do they work? And I guess there's another question. Yeah, how important are internal referrals to getting a position, and what's in it for the company? Emily, if you want to start.
Sure. So the way our referrals work, we actually have an email alias, so referrals at. So what most times happens is an employee, whether they as our previous colleague, maybe a classmate, or maybe someone pinged them on LinkedIn was like, hey, I'm interested. Do you think I'd be a good fit? Anyways, that usually comes through. Which I think it's great when it's that system because, you know, inside you never know how the recruiters divvy up recs or how we do it. At Optimus Ride, the other full-time recruiter and I, we partner with certain directors with certain orgs. So that way we're able to both have eyes and be like, okay, I got this one. So that's usually how we get that information through. And then we usually, you know, as long as we do think there's a good conversation to be had, you know, we'll have that conversation, understand the connection. I think it's a great offering. I mean, we have a pretty significant referral bonus if we end up hiring that person because it's a great route and we have someone advocating for them as well. I think referrals, you know, it really differs at each stage in the company. You know, for us at Optimus Ride right now, we're in a position where we have a lot of aggressive hiring needs to make this year. And we know we have to elevate our team with some pretty senior to principal and managerial level experience. So for us at that time, if, you know, that's not really what we're getting on the referral side, it's great because we always have a bin in our ATS for future potential, right? Whereas we need to fill our immediate needs. Maybe that is outbound sourcing. Maybe it's doing different type of events to get that senior skill set. So that's how it works in with us. But always remember, I always like to say, we're not in the business of burning bridges. So even if right now in this moment isn't the best fit, and maybe it's not tomorrow, being able to set up for a longer term relationship is a great route too.
Absolutely. And we have a similar referral program as well. And referrals are extremely valuable. You know, it's something that I cover with the hiring managers at the intake meeting as well, to please share with your team that we have this open position and, you know, share on your social network as well. So referrals are just so important, and for all levels of roles. We have a similar motto as Emily too. You know, we're a consumer products company, so everybody is a potential customer. So we want everybody to have a great experience. We do try to reach out directly to all of our referrals, but it's highly valuable, absolutely. And, you know, I recommend to everybody as well, you had mentioned the networking, you know, build out your LinkedIn profile, get connected, get involved. I cannot stress that enough. It is so important in the process. Absolutely. Again, kudos to everybody for joining this event today. This is the first step in the process.
Laurie, do you have anything to add?
I would just say that I will refer to colleagues, Jennifer, Emily, you really hit upon some of the key points. So nothing to add.
Just a small follow-up for this. Does this process change for students, like people who are starting out for internships? How do you, you know, how do they go about talking to people and talking to some of the engineers who are working? Because it's kind of difficult to, it's basically important to learn the company culture as well. So is this process different for students?
Many of our engineers are open to connecting for informational interviews. So if you are interested, you can certainly reach out to them. Most of them are on LinkedIn, especially for folks in robotics. It's their community. They're happy to chat. And just to reinforce the point about referrals, we do hire many folks through referrals, but I want to emphasize that if you don't have a contact within the company, it's not going to be a disadvantage to your candidacy. And from a diversity, inclusion, and belonging perspective, we want to make sure that we engage candidates from all different backgrounds. So we don't limit our recruitment to specific universities, or we won't be just looking through that referral lens. We do want to consider all folks, but if you're interested in learning more about the company as you prepare to interview or even before you apply, definitely feel free to reach out to the community that you see on LinkedIn. We just had an internal session about LinkedIn profiles. So I know for a fact that most of our team have not only updated their profiles, but we have an engineering blog for Six River Systems that includes some really interesting perspectives about what's new with our technology. And one great idea would be contacting an author who posted content, because then you know what their area of expertise is if it's not clear from their LinkedIn profile, and you can learn a little bit more about their day-to-day experience.
Absolutely. And I want, the people on this call to, reverse engineer your job search. So, look at the job requisition and the requirements. If it's a hardware team, start, searching for hardware engineers at iRobot, connect with them, find out who their team members are, their managers. Utilize that reverse engineering mindset with your job search as well. The other thing too, think about if you were a business owner or a hiring manager, for a startup or a large publicly traded company, put yourself in their shoes and what would you be looking for? What steps would you take to get, noticed and have your resume stand out from all the other candidates who are applying? So just look at it through several different lenses on how you can connect, but LinkedIn is so important. It really is the career social media platform that all recruiters are on quite frequently.
This is actually what we are trying to do as a group as well. So even Women in Robotics is trying to form a community. So if anybody is like, want to know how it is like working for companies, then we try to establish that network. And so yeah. Okay. Thank you for clearing that out. And the last question for before we move on to live questions from the audience. So what advice would you like to give to women who want to join the field of robotics? And if you maybe missed anything in the interview prep section, any tips, any advice you want to give, please go ahead.
So
Connect with me on LinkedIn.
When we were preparing for this session, one of the questions that came through was like, what would a great resume for a woman in robotics look like? And I wanted to edit that question because I was like, any woman in robotics is awesome, number one.
Oh.
And number two, you really want to be yourself. I always say that, like Emily shared before, it's really a two-way interview experience. And ultimately, what's most important is that you understand the company, you understand the team culture, and you find a really good match. So yes, you want to share information about your awesome engineering experience. We're going to be excited about that. You're excited about that. But you also want to listen and ask those questions to really tease out, is this the right place for my next step in my career? It might not be the next place for the entire duration of your career, but what can you learn? Who will you be working with? What exciting projects will you be able to contribute to or potentially even lead? And the other question I would remind folks to ask is just like, how can you grow with the company? It's really important to understand where the company's headed and how the team and the company are evolving. So if you join, it's not just about what you'll execute in the short term, but like what kind of exciting projects might be on the horizon. So focus on sharing what you know and your experience, but even more importantly, ask those questions to understand if it's a good fit for you.
And to piggyback off that, be your genuine, authentic self. I think Lori, couldn't have said that better. It's so important. Be your genuine, authentic self. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I love the phrase, be unapologetically you. I think that's what it comes down to. And this is my personal take, I am someone who thinks with my gut, and I've been into interviews and I'm just like, this is not the place for me. And I've usually been right in that call. Well, I think it turned out okay, but always think of that. Another thing too is don't self-disqualify yourself. Don't be the first person to disqualify yourself. Studies do show that when there's too many job requirements listed on a job description, women statistically are more likely to say, oh, I don't fit all of that. Please don't do that for yourself. Advocate for yourself. I know a lot of companies, and us too, are trying to be better advocates, that we have more of a fine-tuned and thorough process. But that would be my biggest thing, is don't be the first person to tell yourself no.
That's
I
really
totally
amazing.
feel this way. I mean, I totally understand what you're saying. It's so awesome to say that as well. Like, you should first believe in yourself before you make others believe in you, right? So that's awesome.
I think women tend to undervalue themselves. So and we definitely do need more women in robotics. So please don't just apply and be you. And I think there are great things that you can achieve. So yeah, shall we move on to the live questions now? Sanjuksha, do you wanna take over?
So I think we have only a few remaining. Uh, One of the questions is, as a recent graduate, can we apply for jobs that need experience?
You can, but don't be disappointed if you're not selected. And when I say that, to just connect back to what we discussed earlier, if we recognize potential, but it's not the right role, we might actually communicate about keeping in touch for a future position. So there are roles that require a specific level of experience. There are other roles that are a great fit for someone who's coming out of a university program, whether it's a graduate degree or undergraduate degree. So you can ultimately apply knowing that there's a chance that the company will find a fit for you. But just don't be disappointed if that role isn't the right fit, if they have specific criteria. So with Six River, we're always hiring. So if we find a great engineer who is more of that level one experience, that might be a candidate we keep in touch with and we hire for a different squad.
I normally do that. So like, I just take my chances and apply anyways, even if it needs a lot of experience, because you never know if they're looking for a person with a little bit like experience as well. So thank you for clearing that up. Okay, I can move on to the next question. In how much time should we apply to the position that is posted on the job website or a company website? Because sometimes it's observed that position is filled like in 20 to 30 days. So rephrasing it, how much time does it take for a position to get filled up like normally? And should we like neglect positions if they are open for more than 30 days?
I wouldn't neglect them. Oftentimes we're hiring for multiple positions with the same job title and we're refreshing those as we continue, or maybe we have two open positions on the same squad and one we hire quickly and then the other one we're looking a little bit longer. So if the role is active, it's still an open position. Now, you can also ask where we are in the hiring process, right? Again, two-way street to understand more about the context, because if you're not selected for timing reasons, we might keep in touch for a future position. So you can also ask about the status from the company's perspective.
Absolutely. And Lori had mentioned this earlier about tagging candidates or putting them into career pools as well. So I encourage people to apply, have that conversation with the recruiter, and they can always tag you or put you in a career pool for the next role that opens up as well.
Thank you so much. And towards our next
I
question.
can't hear you. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Mhm.
So do you recommend any LinkedIn communities or groups to look and connect with other people in the industry?
The Society for Women in Engineering is one great community outside of women in robotics, of course.
Mhm.
And there are like two questions with the same point. They're being asking if a person doesn't have internship, because since COVID, people have been lacking some luck in the internships part. So if they don't have an internship from the past, does it like really hurt their resume, or what can they do to like, come up with everyone else, like catch up?
No, this is a very different career landscape than if we were having this call a year ago. So, definitely flexible. I would just recommend, highlight your projects, anything that you're proud of or you feel are your strengths, highlight that on your resume. Absolutely.
I think Lori alluded it to as well, and it's definitely my theory when it comes to recruitment is not going after a specific university or specific type of thing, right? It's not all about pedigree, but it's about what you do with it and what you own with that. And that happens and that's normal. And I think one, if you are honest with it, that's great. You have that sense of ownership, but what did you do to, tackle that? Yeah, that was probably a little bit of a bump in the road, but how did you bounce back? Was it taking
Yes.
free online courses with edX? Was it, which is also a Boston-based company? Was it with Emeritus taking some other online courses, which is also a Boston-based company, and all different things like that? Like, this is how I took this negative and turned it around, so I was able to learn from that. And I think that really shows that, one, you kind of have that intrinsic motivation to make yourself a little bit better, even when, maybe something didn't go in your favor. And I think that really does come down to grit, which is really great, especially for us at this point in our startup venture. Or startup journey. That's something that we really value as well.
Emily, great point. I absolutely love that and that resilience. So that was a great response, and I agree.
Yeah, I was just thinking like the same. Sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
I was just thinking the same thing would be applicable to write in cover letters, right? In this case, is that a good idea? Thank you.
Yeah, and as you continue to grow in your career, whether it's returning to the workforce, if you're on leave, or if you want to make a career change, oftentimes it's more about like what you're dedicating your time to, whether it's projects, it might be at work, outside of work, continuous learning, a certification, just indications that you are committed to pursuing that new pathway. That's as important as the specifics of an internship on your resume.
Thank you very much. This is now the last question of the evening. So are there any roles that you would consider growing in need that are not programming focused?
Definitely. So one of them is the customer success role in our technical operations teams that are customer facing. So we have a variety of roles that require a knowledge base related to robotics. And some of the folks are working in the field to train customers on how to use the solution from a customer success perspective. So that's a growing field. If you like working with the customer, you like solving problems, whether it's being hands-on from a hardware perspective or creating the tools behind the scenes that'll help the team scale. Technical operations and those types of roles or customer success might be another area to focus on. And oftentimes we've had folks enter the team in a technical operations position where you might be, as an example, a deployment engineer who's working with our Chucks, our collaborative mobile robots in the field. We've had some of those folks move into our software engineering teams after a few years at Six Rivers. So definitely a great starting point if you want to be hands-on with the technology and you're looking for a path for growth in the company.
Yeah, that's a great idea to move towards software from that position. Yeah, Thank you.
We have similar needs and roles open as well in terms of our product management, program manager types of roles that are customer facing, where you still need to have that technical aptitude, but in a different fashion. So absolutely, iRobot has many customer facing roles. So yes, definitely flexible needs.
Right. We're at an interesting point at Optimus Ride as well, because we're scaling so significantly this year. We've just formalized a technical program management department, and we did have TPMs within the org, but we had about 2 or 3, and now we really made it their own org to really support all of the cross-functional mobility. So if you're someone who likes to remain technical, but maybe not hands on the keyboard all day, that's a really great route, because as you excel in your career, it's like doing technical roadmaps and leading cross-functional teams, which is really great. But also other routes. I mean, for us too, we're finally now building out a true sales, biz dev, and marketing org. But also within engineering too, there's non-programming opportunities. For instance, in our mechatronics group, we just hired our first buyer. And she does have a technical buying background in terms of that the type of equipment and hardware she was buying was of technical nature, and now just shifting that over into our environment, but it still has the buying and the negotiating, the forecasting skills, just happens to be within a technical team.
That's a very interesting job profile. So I guess that's mostly it from, we have one more questions. Just what is the level of programming knowledge is difference between like a software CS job role and a robotic job role, robotic software engineer?
It depends so much on the organization and the technologies. What I would say is we do take time to share information about the role. So that might include the specific technologies. And ultimately, you also want to learn about what the projects are that you would be focusing on, because even if you're working with the same technologies, you might be working with them in different ways. In different companies, on different squads, you might need a specific level of expertise. So the answer is it really depends. And it's important to read information about the position and also just asking questions about like what's most important, and then sharing your skills accordingly.
I think it does, Lori's absolutely right. Excuse me, it does differ in every environment. With us right now, I think it also depends on the stage of the company. Right now, all of our engineering managers are still contributing to the code base because we just don't have a need for a full 100% people manager just yet. We'd love to get there if I do a lot of hiring, right? But we're not just there yet. So keep in mind, it does differ very much around the stage and size of the company versus where they're looking to be.
I agree with both Lori and Emily.
I think that's most of it. We have one more question, but I think we did answer it already. So I think that's all from the audience. And for all the audience who, if you think you have more questions, please feel free to email us on womeninrobotics@Boston, like womeninroboticsboston@gmail. And I'm sure our panelists are also very welcoming today, so they are happy to answer your questions too. So thank you so much once again for everyone. Handing over to Dharini for the last one.
Thank you, Sanjuksha. Feel free to connect with any of us on LinkedIn, and this is what our group is for, to establish the network. And on an end note, a very big, hearty thank you to all our panelists for your time, for sharing your experience, and just wonderful advice. The STAR approach, being active, making most of this time, and most importantly, creating a network on LinkedIn. So thank you so much. And I hope everyone had a good time. And well, I definitely learned a lot of new things from you guys. And to job seekers, best of luck. And thank you all for joining. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a nice night.